Okay, we are live. I'm just gonna give it a couple minutes, um, and then we'll jump right in. Sorry, Colleen's just telling me that maybe it's not actually live yet, so just give me 1 second. We're just gonna give it 5 more minutes just because it is still going live on the VoxCan Facebook page. So just a couple minutes. Okay, so I have received news that all the live streams are officially working, which is wonderful. So now we can actually jump in. Um, so I'll just start by just saying welcome all. We are very excited to have you all here, as well as our viewers and our panelists. So pretty much this discussion is happening live on the VoxCan as well as the Cannabis and Psychosis Facebook pages and the Cannabis and Psychosis YouTube channel. And also we will share a link to watch on the Cannabis and Psychosis YouTube channel afterwards, and it'll be up for viewing after as well. We would just like to start off by acknowledging that VoxCan is headquartered on the unceded land of the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation called Jojage. And beyond just doing land acknowledgements, we'd like to encourage all our viewers to understand and actively support Indigenous liberation struggles in your area, as well as across the land, so-called Canada. So VoxCan and Cannabis and Psychosis, as well as Get Sensible, are all of the ones bringing you this event. So just a little bit about all of us. VoxCan is a bilingual cannabis education initiative that was built by youth and for youth and is based in Montreal. We use a variety of strategies to position young people as the drivers of their own cannabis education, by providing opportunities for them to engage with evidence-based information and support for informed decision-making. Cannabis and Psychosis is a project of the Schizophrenia Society of Canada. This award-winning project generates important information about the reasons young people use, their lived experience, and why they felt it was important to communicate to other youth about key issues related to cannabis and psychosis. Now, Get Sensible is programmed by Canadian Students for Sensible Drug Policy, which is a grassroots network of youth and students who are concerned about the negative impact our drug policies have had on individuals and communities. CSSDP, as well as Get Sensible campaign, considers drug use as a health and human rights issue rather than a criminal legal issue, and therefore advocates for evidence-based responses to reduce and prevent the harms associated with drug use and drug criminalization. Get Sensible is a project funded by Health Canada. So we'll just start off by introducing all of our panelists. So we'll go with name, pronouns, location, your interest and involvement with the topic of cannabis. I can start us off just as the moderator. My name is Emma Hébert. I am in Montreal usually, but right now I'm in Toronto. My interest involvement with the topic of cannabis, and this specifically, is just that I've been a weed user for a significant amount of years now. I've also been queer for a significant amount of years, and I think that it's important that we get sensible education, but we get sensible education around the topic, and especially take it from more of a harm reductionist perspective than a punitive perspective. Kira, do you want to go next?
For sure. Thank you for having me. My name's Kira. I use she, her pronouns. I'm also based out of Jojage, also known as Montreal. And I am part of the VoxCan project as well as the Cannabis and Psychosis project. And I'm a PhD student at the University of Montreal, studying the relationships between weed and mental health, particularly in sexually and gender diverse communities. So I'm really interested both. I am a gay cis woman, and very interested to hear from the perspectives of the other panelists, both from a research perspective, but also just from like a community perspective, and learning more.
Great. Connor, do you want to go next?
Ani Bojo, Connor Ndijnakaz. My name is Connor Lafortune. I am based out of Nswakmok, which is also known as Sudbury, on Robinson Huron territory and Dish with One Spoon Treaty. I am a part of Cannabis Psychosis Canada, and I'm also a queer person, and I've been a drug user for many years, I guess. I'm not sure exactly the date. Like Kira said, I'm just interested on seeing everybody's perspectives and seeing how my story relates to others.
Great, thanks for sharing. Alyssa, do you want to go next?
Sure. So my name's Alyssa. I'm a queer trans woman. I go by she, her. I am a sex worker. That's my main job. I'm based in the city of Montreal, and I've been using cannabis for 15 years.
Great, thank you. And Ruben, do you want to go there?
Hey everyone, I'm Ruben. I use he, they, clean, and your highness pronouns. I do consider myself to be a queer, non-binary, gender fluid type person. Um, I've been using cannabis recreationally since about 2013. I'm a yoga teacher and I live nomadically, so I'm always based out of somewhere different. Yeah, and I'm super stoked to share my experiences traveling and meeting other queer folk who use cannabis, and to everyone else's perspectives too.
Great. Thank you so much, everybody, for sharing. We'll get into more specifics about what exactly kind of our backgrounds are with cannabis as well as queerness in just a bit. Just so we go over the theme of the event very quickly. We are mainly looking at how cannabis and queerness as well as gender diversity inform and impact just the general experience of cannabis. And this is part of the Ask the Expert series. We're looking to answer all our questions around this by hearing from both research perspectives as well as individuals. And through this, the discussion is really meant to give an opportunity to the audience to better understand all the intersections of queerness and gender diversity with cannabis, mental health, access to knowledge around cannabis for queer and gender diverse people, and anything else that really comes up. So just the actual structure of the discussion, we're pretty much just going to go through a general discussion. During the discussion, please feel free to comment and ask questions. But just a disclaimer for the people commenting, please be mindful of the space that you're taking up in the comments. Especially at the end, we want to be able to see the questions that the audience asks, and it's a lot easier to do that just if there isn't like 50 consecutive comments, that kind of thing. So at the end, there will be an audience question and answer where we'll just take questions from the Facebook chat or from the YouTube link, and we'll get some answers on them. At the end, we're just going to drop a very quick review survey. So the audience, you can all let us know how we did, what you'd like to see more, that kind of thing. And yeah, so now we can actually kind of get a little bit more into the topic itself. So just kind of opening up the floor here, looking at each of our individual backgrounds with cannabis. A question for all the panelists is how and when did you become interested in the topic of cannabis itself? Can you tell us a bit more about your experience with the different aspects of cannabis in your respective lives, and maybe also a little bit about your experience with queerness in your respective lives? I don't know who wants to take the floor first, but if anybody has any particularly strong feelings, please feel free to jump right in.
I'll go ahead and start. Well, so as I said, I started using cannabis back in 2013. It was actually a friend of mine who suggested that I try cannabis out the first time. So back in 2012, I actually had a surgery on my leg that left me barred to a wheelchair for 9 months. And then I had to learn how to walk all over again. So fast forward 2013, I was still having a lot of pain. I wasn't on like the same pain medications from the doctor anymore. So it wasn't really like that helpful. And my friend was like, yo, you should just smoke like weed and see if it helps. And it did. And I was like, whoa. So that was pretty much my introduction to smoking. And as far as being queer, yeah, I don't know. I've always been a little queer and doing my thing, doing what I want, and living life in makeup and heels if I can, or living life. It's like a dude look, I think, if I can. Yeah.
That's great. Who do we have any volunteers for who's coming up next? Alyssa?
I could do it. Yeah. Well, the reason why I started smoking weed is pretty typical. I think I was a teenager and I thought it was cool, and I wish I had more information back then about the use of cannabis. but I didn't, and whatever. About the queerness, though, I didn't always embrace it. For a long time, I just repressed it, and it took me a while to accept it. But I've been living my truly self for like 3 years now, and I've never been happier. So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing. Connor?
Yeah, I think my usage started pretty normal as well. I grew up in a really, really small town. We were like a friend group of like 9, and we did everything together from like hockey, baseball, school, everything. We were the same group. And so I think my usage started pretty much just the same kind of thing, like, oh, okay, people are doing it. That's kind of cool. I'll start as well. But then it also became something that I used to be like, oh, okay, yeah, I can feel like myself when I'm doing it. I can be like queer. I don't have to like hide behind anything. Not that I was openly queer with everyone at that time. It's just I didn't feel like I was so anxious about not being it. And so it just allowed me that like space to just be myself and not have to have so much anxiety around like, oh, what can I say? What can't I say? And all of those things. So I think those really played like they really played into each other, as well as like just usage and just being queer in a small town. um, and as far as like how long I've been queer for or whatever that means, I think it's just something that I've always just like whenever I would see people on TV, I'd be like, ah, those are like beautiful people. And then like you realize when you're like a young guy in the locker room that like not every guy finds other guy attractive. So you're like, oh, okay, all right, I'm gonna just keep that to myself for a bit until it's right to say so. But yeah, as far as like that goes, that's how my experience went.
Great, thanks so much. Kira?
So I'll go next. I'll answer the queer portion first. It's a little shorter. So I came out first slowly in high school, but my like trajectory with queerness, at the beginning identifying as bi and now identifying as like mostly gay, has been pretty straightforward. I guess not that straight, but it's been a pretty easy process on that side. Like I've always had this kind of jock identity, so I feel like in a certain sense that made things easier because it's like, is she gay or does she just play basketball? It kind of like smoothed things into, I guess to a certain extent, like people's expectations. And then the cannabis side, initially my like engagement with cannabis, I tried it out in high school and, you know, used at different frequencies throughout my life since then. But for a long time, it was just kind of apolitical. It was just like something that I would do with friends, with people close to me. But in university during my bachelor's degree, I started to learn more about the real disconnect that exists between substances and their criminalized or legalized status, and how truly social drugs are in general. So I really became more interested in like the socio-political side of things as well. And then in the context of a class that I was doing, I did this lit review on queer and gender diverse folks and cannabis and mental health, which is kind of what foreshadowed the rest of my academic path. And finding out a lot of like really interesting things about folks in the community having higher rates of cannabis use, higher rates of challenges with their mental health, but also how like this link was or is, you know, deeply social and deeply influenced through our social settings and aspects of our lives that are shaped by like our queerness or our gender. And so since then, I've kind of gone with it. And as I said in the beginning, interested in it from like a research perspective, but also just from the point of view of generating knowledge and communicating knowledge that will be beneficial to our communities.
That's great. Oh, sorry, everybody. That's great. Thank you all so much for sharing. I'm glad that we have such a kind of like a wide variety of perspectives within this one chat, because it's better to get sometimes a lot more different perspectives than just a singular, monolith of queer experience, because, hard to reduce a queer experience to a monolith in the first place. So we can kind of get into the actual, like our specific discussion questions right now. So one thing that kind of comes up a lot, particularly in relation to queerness and cannabis use, is that sexually and gender diverse people have higher rates of substance use, not just particularly cannabis use, that as well, than straight and cisgender counterparts. So how do you all think that your experiences with cannabis differ from those of straight and cisgender people?
Should I go first? Okay.
Take it away.
Well, personally, in my experience, I haven't found that like non-queer people or queer people are more prone to cannabis use. But one thing that I can definitely like not deny is that when I see a queer person, I almost assume that they use cannabis and or other drugs. And that's like, I don't know, it happens naturally. It's just a thought that goes to my head, and then I have to tell myself, well, wait, maybe they don't, And but other than that, I haven't, like in my personal experience, I haven't found that like queer people were more prone to cannabis use specifically.
For sure. And it's always interesting seeing the difference between, say, like what we can read in like a study and take that as maybe a certain fact, like, oh, queer people use cannabis at higher rates and whatnot, and then how it actually manifests in, say, our personal lives, and how there is kind of that gap between the larger level narrative and maybe the personal one. Did anybody else have a perspective? Yeah, go for it.
I think answering the question for me is a little difficult, just because I grew up in a small town. The first time I saw like queer people out and about, I was in 11th grade, like before I saw like a room of queer people. And even before I had like a group of queer friends, I was probably like, like late 12th grade or like first year university. So like my queer circles are not the biggest things in my life. And so it's just been, it's a difficult way to answer the question. I don't necessarily see a heavier usage, just a different usage. Like like queer folk, I think we use it in a different way, and more of like in a social healing kind of gathering as like part of queer culture, and not just something to do like with the boys kind of thing, like after a game or something. I think I definitely noticed the way that the queer folk use cannabis is so drastically different than just mainstream usage. So I don't know if it's more concentrated, but I definitely agree with Alyssa's point where like as soon as you see queer person, I'm like, okay, so you're probably like chances are you use cannabis in some form, whether it's for anxiety, to sleep, or as like something to do with friends. I think it's just become a social thing that we've gathered. Like you see a lot of like gay clubs and stuff like that, but a lot of things where that's adapted to the 21st century is like just like having like smoking circles and like things like that. I think like that's our new version of those clubs that have like adapted just like a more chill version. I think when it comes to like looking at those intersections between like being queer and using cannabis, you really have to, like for me, I have to look at like my indigeneity as well, because I can't really separate that from the fact that like the stereotypes are different, or the usage is different just because of like cultural reasons. And so for me personally, like that my usage has significantly dropped just because of like I've just stopped using substances like as a whole. And so like my cannabis use has just like dropped just because other substances have like completely been eradicated. So I definitely think those intersections, and I think as queer folk, we have those intersections that are continuously like just adding to our queerness. And so I think that like brings another level to that question as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. Would Kira or Ruben, do you have any thoughts on the matter? Ruben?
Oh, okay. You unmute you. Sorry, I think I have a little bit of a lag. I apologize. I just wanted to I guess piggyback. Sorry, it sounds like a very formal thing to say, but kind of bounce off of like what Alyssa and Connor, the two of you, were saying. I think that the ways that like we have all these different ways of consuming, and also like different meanings, right, that we attribute to our use and to our communal use, I think is exactly the reason why like these types of conversations are so rich, and why I just like love talking with other queer people about like why this link exists. Because if you do look at the research and you just see like higher rates of use, that is such a minimal aspect of like what, you know, the significance of cannabis use really is in our communities. I will say that like one thing that I've heard from several young queer people is the sentence that weed is cheaper than therapy. I think that resonates a lot with like the way that homophobia and transphobia permeate all aspects of our lives, of our access to services, of the relevance of those services to be able to support us in our different experiences. And I, at the same time, kind of hesitate to only bring up that side of it, because it's not like the like use of cannabis is purely like a self-medication, and even like the term self-medication itself is very medical, and doesn't necessarily speak to the way that like cannabis can be a lot more of like a spiritual experience, or like a tool that people use without calling it necessarily medication. So yeah, I guess I would say that in a very like unsatisfactory way of finishing my answer, that there's just like so many different ways that we use it. But I would agree that something that is different is the tool for like collective healing, and being able to turn to cannabis, especially in the absence of being supported in other aspects of our lives. And also, sorry, I thought I was done, but just one other point is that I think also a lot of folks have a connection with cannabis that becomes to a certain extent intertwined with our identities. I think that especially it's something that like in my research has come up, is that in like adolescence, when you're really trying to figure yourself out and see where you fit in with your peer groups, with the world, consuming cannabis can be a way to connect with others, especially when you're maybe struggling to connect with others along other axes, right? Because you're questioning those aspects of yourself. I'm gonna finish there.
We can hand it over to Ruben.
Yeah, I'll jump in there. Well, I think so. Okay, like we were saying that, or like just jumping into what you were saying, Alyssa, that you don't really see much of a difference between the two. I want to say I don't either, but it's because I typically hang out in queer scenarios. So like after coming out and after like experiencing like life, I've like clung to the queer community, and I knew that that was like my home, you know. So of course I smoke with all my like homies, but then like in like straight situations or heterosexual like dominant situations, I end up being like typically like one of the only people who's like outside like spliff after spliff after spliff after spliff, because I just get nervous because people don't know how to like refer to me, or like I will introduce myself and say my pronouns, and then people are like, what? Like it's like I don't typically bring myself into those situations unless I have like a pocket with spliffs in it, so that you know, because I know I'm not going to be able to handle it. And also, I mean, not just in like heterosexual situations, or I don't know what else to call them. Heterosexual situations, that sounds like really intense. I don't know. But like whenever I am like going out or something to meet friends at a bar or anything, cannabis usually helps me get in the mindset and like erase his anxiety. And I know a lot of people usually feel anxious when they smoke or when they use cannabis, but for me, it's usually like an alleviator. It's something that I can use to like have conversations with people without feeling like all this pressure, or like all these people are like staring at me, and or whatever else is involved in it. Yeah, I think that's where I'm gonna stop there, because I don't know, I'm gonna keep going, and I feel like I'm rambling.
I totally agree with you. I know what you're saying. Like, and also it's a thing, like, alcohol is socially accepted to like be more decontracted and relax yourself and get in the mood and like socialize. And it's not a thing with weed, like in general. And I think queer people are maybe like more comfortable with like using this as a tool instead of alcohol. I don't know. I just see a lot of queer people who are more comfortable with weed than alcohol. So yeah, I see what you're saying. Like, if I get into a group of people and I'm like the only queer in there, I might want to go smoke every 15 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. And like I also feel like this goes into like alcoholism as well. Like in the relation to queerness, a lot of queer people actually have trauma that is like lingered into alcohol use from like growing up and different things like that, where weed, if someone is being abused by a parent who's like an alcoholic versus someone who has a parent who's smoking weed, like their parents probably laying down on the couch and not yelling at them, not like being physically violent or something, because weed is something, it's a downer, it brings you down and makes you feel more calm. But we have like all these situations where it's like, oh, alcohol, we need this, we have to be drunk. But it's like, for me, I'd rather be in the backyard at a bonfire passing around spliffs, like
Yeah, sure.
I also like, yeah, super, and this, I love like this conception of how to see it, because I also feel that spaces that are based on the consumption of alcohol are frequently more volatile or more unpredictable, and can therefore feel a lot more unsafe for folks. Whereas like, if you think of the type of introspection that a lot of people can get from cannabis, and that how that like introspection can then become more, collective. You're just like pondering, I don't know, the meaning of life, or your gender, or your sexual orientation, or whatnot. Like those conversations can also become like a lot more generative. And so I feel like there's perhaps, and I don't know if you folks would agree, but there's perhaps more safety that people feel in like spaces where you're mostly using cannabis as opposed to alcohol, for example.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I would almost say also that like the use of cannabis, like as it's being more like legalized and stuff all over the world, it's just like it's a slow progression, whereas alcohol, you can go anywhere and get it. So based on when people started using cannabis and they were hiding, you're in more intimate settings with smaller groups of people, and you get to know each other a little bit better. And like alcohol, it's like you're at the bar screaming across the bar, yelling at your friend, like, hey, like pass me my jacket, like whatever. And like that's nothing, but like I love, like my friends and I would be sitting on like a couch, like cuddling, like passing our splits back and forth, just like, oh my God, like I remember this day, and like sharing long stories about, like growing up, or like our first experiences doing things. And it feels like you almost get to know people more than when you're drinking. I feel it's like you're feeling like you're getting to know someone because you're having so much fun. But like with cannabis use, you're like actually like having long-winded discussions and like enjoying what each other have to say without your brain being like, oh, I need another drink. It's like, you know what I mean? Yeah.
I think cannabis use makes queer people think of that intimate setting of being queer and coming out and having those intimate circles with the queerness. And then it just translates to having those intimate settings with cannabis. Like, I think it's just something that we're so used to just being like, oh, a little bit of time, like, well, do you smoke? Oh, are you gay? Like those little circles that just kind of like build slowly. I think it's like just the same process, just a different kind of thing. And they just really mesh together well.
Yeah.
For sure. And also, it is like notable that like alcohol overall, like in keeping with the whole like rainbow washing or like corporatism, is that a lot of like queer spaces have like for a long time been really monopolized by alcohol, or have been like very limited by like only being like access to alcohol, in terms of just like having like an explicitly like gay bar to go to, rather than, and it's been kind of like a point of contestation for a while of like how we can ensure to kind of provide more queer spaces that aren't necessarily contingent on just the consumption of alcohol. So I think it's really interesting what you all brought up about having that kind of intimate space where, like you said, it's not so volatile or maybe so kind of exposed, but is rather kind of like a even just a community building experience, really. Just another thing, kind of just quickly, because I realized, we've been talking a lot about community as well throughout. How would you all actually define kind of your community in terms of queerness? Would you have like, is it quite intimate? Do you take it as like a wider kind of moniker for the whole community? How would you actually define just the community?
Should I go first? I will.
Go for it.
My community is, I would say, pretty much queer, and it's also very large. I'm very like public about what I do as a living. I'm not hiding it. I'm even like working to like normalize what I do, because I think there's still a lot of stigma around my job, and yeah, doing that, like it's kind of like automatic. You get like a very, very wide circle of people. You talk to like hundreds of people online, and oh yeah, I feel like I'm in like part of like a queer network, literally. I know people from all over the world, and they're queer, and I'm just happy to know them, and it makes me feel like I'm not alone, and that there's a lot of us, and it gives me hope, I guess.
Thank you for sharing that. Anybody have another answer?
I think I have like a funny way of looking at my queer community because I don't have that much of an intimate, like close knit like community. Like I do have, obviously I do have friends that are queer, and like my closest friends are queer, but like I mostly have like this wide community. Like I feel like if ever I'm like in public, I'm like, okay, you have like a queer sticker. I'm like, all right, we're good. Like there's just like this like connection that we have, and it's like just like subtle things. It's like, oh, okay, cool. I see that you're like, I don't know, wearing a binder. I'm like, okay, cool, we're good. This is like a cool space, or like little things that like as queer people we kind of just notice how to navigate the world in that way, and kind of notice where like safety is, even if it's like subtly just kind of available. Um, I have like a really like heteronormative, cisnormative like community, just like environment. So it's kind of hard to like find that those queer spaces, especially like kind of tight knit within those indigenous spaces, and like trying to navigate those like intersections of spaces. But I definitely have like a a broader community. Like I do quite a few panels on like the French Franco-Ontarien side of like queer panels, and it's like you see all of these like queer folk from like across Ontario, but like in my environment I don't really have that, so it's kind of a weird like grand scale queer community, but not so much of a tight-knit community.
Thank you for sharing. Kira or Ruben, whichever.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of like, I guess piggybacking, but Connor, like how you said that your queer community is kind of like broad, I feel oddly like I have broad queer communities that are super intimate, because like I said, I'm a nomadic yoga teacher, so I've lived in a few different countries. Oh my god, I just spilled my water. Okay, sorry. I've lived in a couple of different countries, and even different states in the U.S. And in all of these different places, queer people kind of, when you notice another queer person, you give each other that like security nod, like, hey, I see you, don't worry, like we're fine, we're family kind of thing. And then later I've like met them again or something, and we ended up having those like very intimate moments where we're like sitting down on a sidewalk, like sharing a joint or sharing a spliff, and I feel like even though I have these broad communities, like they're all over the world, like I couldn't walk to someone's house from where I am right now to one of those people, but I could call them really easy in multiple different countries and be like, hey, like what's going on? And we could talk for like 8 hours on the phone about whatever thing, and I feel like my queer community, it's there are some people that are even, I call them like hetero queers, who are like, so I have like 2 friends who are like heterosexuals, but I swear they're queer. Like I'm always like, no, like you're just doing the wrong thing. Like just come over to my side. But like it's like we're all still super intimate, but we live like miles and miles and miles and miles apart. And if I were to call one of them up, they would fly here immediately, and we would, be in that intimate setting again. But they are far and widespread. I also, without talking too much, which I do a lot, but can you see how anxious I am right now? Because I'm like talking about how much I'm talking. Okay, I'll calm down. But where was I going with this, actually? So I just threw myself off. But okay, well, that means my brain is saying it's time to stop. So I'm gonna mute.
I loved all of that. That was great. Yeah, I was like, damn, like this is a big question in terms of, like what is your community and stuff? Because my first thought is like, what do you mean? Like everyone's queer, kind of like what you're just saying about, I have like one token straight friend, maybe like 3 to be actually, realistic about it. But like somehow I feel like I just like gravitate towards more like either like queer spaces, even that are not explicitly queer. I mean, I mentioned like sports as one, but mostly like harm reduction spaces, I think that are just really queer, and for a good reason, right? I think that like on the one side, like a lot of queer people and gender diverse people find benefits from different drugs. Like we've talked about cannabis, but a variety of other drugs too, not limited to, but including like psychedelics. There are a lot of stories or like people talking about how psychedelics have helped them come to terms with who they are and like have more clarity and insight. But then also like harm reduction on the other side of like having a relationship with substances that is not a good relationship, that is not a relationship that works for you, and still benefiting from the compassion and patience and support that harm reduction based perspectives aim to provide. So yeah, like somehow like just being in harm reduction focused spaces, I feel like we just end up like finding a lot of community in this way. So yeah, and oh yeah, also the like seeing people on the street, absolutely, like I like feel in community with folks who are like very like I don't know, like visibly queer or like doing gay stuff or like whatever, like instantaneously, even of course, like if we don't know each other, and that's really like I think attests to the fact of like the importance of being able to access like representation in the media, as well as in our own spaces, like intimately, or in our municipalities, in our cities, in our everyday lives too. I don't know. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Emma. I also talk too much. You need to have the power to mute me.
This is the cutoff. My apologies, but thank you for all of that. I know I kind of hit you guys with a really large question there. And I appreciate all of your answers. So just kind of also like going into that kind of community aspect, kind of interpersonally and on a larger level. In terms of kind of like accessing knowledge around cannabis use, specifically for queer individuals, are there barriers that are like specific to the queer community that prevent us from accessing knowledge around cannabis use? Or is it pretty much across the board? Go for it.
Personally, I haven't seen it with my own eyes because, as I said earlier, I've only like I always identified as queer, but like I've been presenting myself as my true self for only like 3 years, and I already pretty much knew everything I need to know about weed. But one thing I saw though is that like people who are not like who doesn't have like a lot of knowledge on the subject will tend to like think they will see a queer people who wants to use cannabis and they will instantly think negatively of it. Instead of it's like a conforming person that say they want to use cannabis, they're gonna be more like, oh yeah, well it's legal now, and like if you use it in moderation, it can be good for you. But if you're queer and like you have like a certain look and you're non-conforming, people are gonna be more judgmental about your drug use.
Yeah, that's a great point, especially just related to overall stigmatization of not only cannabis, but just the intersections. Connor, you want?
Yeah, I think I definitely agree. I think it like when you're queer and you're using drugs or you're anything but like cishet white Christian basically, and you're doing something that isn't any of those things, you like gets put into a box. Like if you're queer and using drugs, like oh, it's because they're queer, and it plays into the stereotypes of being queer. It's like it's a phase, or they're gonna ruin their life because of this, and it just really keeps like bouncing off of each other. I also think a lot of like just like cannabis spaces are inherently like homophobic or transphobic or queerphobic. Like a lot of like my cannabis knowledge comes from like my uncles and my grandfather. And like I'm not saying that inherently in my circle they are, but I know that they're the circles that they run in or like their generation can be. And so you can show up to a cannabis shop and you could be asking questions and you could be like wanting to learn about a different thing or anything. And those spaces don't necessarily need to be queer friendly. And like even though we like to associate like cannabis and like drug use with like with like safe spaces or like queer friendly spaces, they aren't inherently those things. And so I think it becomes hard when we're entering those spaces thinking that we'll be safe, thinking that it will be a comfortable space for us, and then entering and just being faced with like homophobia, transphobia, queerphobia, and like it just really hits you like a ton of bricks because you're not expecting it to be that like unsafe space. You're thinking like, oh, like drug use, that's a very like open and safe thing that we're talking about, and I'm just going there to learn, and you could be hit with all of these boundaries that hit you.
Yeah, that's another great point, especially with kind of like along the waves of like legalization and the opening up of a lot more of those like cannabis friendly spaces. Ruben or Kira?
I'll say that I think so. For me, this perspective is a little bit different because as a like POC Black person, like I feel like people automatically assume I also have dreadlocks. So people automatically look at me and are like, this guy knows about weed, you know? And then they look at me again and they're like, oh, Andy's queer. Like, you know, so there's like, I wouldn't call it barriers from my own perspective. I feel like it was almost just kind of invited to me, you know. It's like, oh, there's this queer Black guy, you know, with locks, like of course we got to tell him about weed. And traveling, it's like anytime I've gone to different countries, no matter what, I never have any problem finding where like the dispensaries are or where to find weed or any of this stuff, because everyone immediately is just like, oh yeah, like you want to smoke? And then I'm like, sure, how did you know? Because like like is it that obvious, you know? So I think from my perspective, I haven't, met any barriers with it. It's just been almost like invited just from my birth look phase. I don't know which word I'm trying to say, but yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing, especially within, I mean, the queer community itself, like especially the white queer community has constant problems with racism within, especially people, white people within the queer community. And that doesn't stop at cannabis spaces, especially when we're getting into that time again of that increasing like commercialization. Kira?
Yeah, I guess my angle is perhaps a little bit different. In this case, more from the research than my like own experiences, but I think also just like the lack of harm reduction approaches to cannabis. So, like for example, when accessing mental health services, having services that will look down on your cannabis use or even like require you to be abstinent. Or like blame the difficulties that you're facing on your cannabis use and, kind of like drawing the line there, I think is very like prohibitive for folks accessing services that they might be interested in accessing otherwise. And then equally, like when it comes to education, like the fact that abstinence for so long has been the main approach that we've adopted when it comes to education means that, considering the higher levels of cannabis and other drug use amongst queer and gender diverse youth, the fact that we're either like teaching young people to strive not to use and, or penalizing them for using, without giving folks tools to think more critically about their use, being able to use more safely, use harm reduction methods. That also is like a barrier for folks developing a relationship with weed if they choose to have one that is better for them and more helpful for them. So I feel like when it comes to like institutional barriers, those are really big as well in terms of just like the lack of a harm reduction approach implicitly and disproportionately affecting communities that do consume more, including like queer and gender diverse communities.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. Going into a bit more of kind of something that's been brought up in terms of maybe like access to spaces, particularly cannabis spaces. Just looking at kind of the history of criminalization of both cannabis and queerness, being that they have both been criminalized at various points in time and that criminalization is still ongoing. Yet both queerness and cannabis have seen a more recent kind of co-optation by corporate identities. So we have, rainbow capitalism, Apple Store dispensaries, that kind of thing. Could you all maybe share a bit about how you see kind of this co-opting of queerness and cannabis and how, if at all, we can actually resist these things? Go for it.
All right, I'm going to jump in here because I absolutely detest everything about commercialization for pride stuff. It bothers me to no end, and I will never spend a dime on anything from a store that is like throwing out there, oh, look, we now celebrate pride because it's 2021. Like, no, you should have been doing this all along. And same thing for like weed products and stuff. Like, I don't want to buy like for me, I have a very hard time wanting to buy weed from like, in all honesty, from somebody who probably is white and owns a building. And I have plenty of brothers and sisters and folks that are, Black that are locked up and they're queer and they're locked up still to this day because of their use of cannabis. And then now we have like stores just willy-nilly everywhere. And it's the same thing with like queerness. Like it's been criminalized in so many different places. And now that it's like legal and stuff, it's like, or like, legal and like we're like liberated and free. Now the corporations are like taking in dimes on it. And it's like, like, no, like, hit up Etsy, go on Instagram, support your queer brothers and sisters, and like, fam, you know, like, seriously, like I will never buy a flag from Walmart from, you know, to celebrate Pride. I will always literally, like, if it's available to us, everything is like literally available to us at our fingertips now because of technology. So there, in my opinion, I really think that it makes no sense, and I really just, I'm sorry, I can go on and on about this rant about how much I absolutely hate the corporatization of the marijuana products and queer stuff. So, but that's my like heatedness. And now that that's out, I'll be.
No, we really appreciate it. Feel free to continue talking about it. Would anybody else like to jump in first, though?
I think when oh, sorry, you can
go ahead, Connor. No, go ahead.
Okay. I absolutely agree with you. I don't think I could have said it better myself. You like hit the nail on the head. It was perfect. I think as soon as something gets commercialized, the whole point of it gets lost, and it's just like, oh, it's cool now, and we can make money off of it. Let's roll with it. Like I think it's something that happens over and over again, especially with like minority things, especially with like even just to give an example, like for indigenous people, like our ceremonies and our smudges and everything were like criminalized. We could go to jail or worse because we performed a ceremony, and then they took our kits and started selling them at Sephora, and now we don't have any shells. Like, and so everything, it's just so it's just the same cycle that proves itself over and over again. That like they take this thing, they criminalize it, they make it not okay, and then like white cis het people try to like, we're like, oh no, that's kind of cool, all right, we can make money off of it, let's do it, we're all going to do it, and now we're going to make big bank on it, and then we're going to look like these people that are so like with the times and so accepting of people and so this and that, and it's just such a fake like two-faced thing just to make money and pretend to be good. Like I absolutely hate it.
And it's all like to like when it's convenient for them, right? And then the rest of us and our like ancestors of the queer world have been like, you know, like destroyed, and they are like almost like, you know, unintentional martyrs for us, you know, like they weren't dying for this cause then at first, you know, it was, they were dying because they were being mistreated, and then people started standing up for it and becoming martyrs. And then fast forward to today, it's like corporations are like, yeah, here you go. And we're like, well, we've been doing this all along, we don't need your permission to like to do all of this stuff. And yeah, it's sorry, I'm heated about this one.
Absolutely.
Well,
Alyssa, do you want to?
I'm pretty sure we all agree on that here, but like, yeah, I think the only positive aspect that can come out of that, and it's not like worth all the other negative aspects, is like the representation amongst people who've like never heard about what a queer person is or a trans person is, or, you know, because for some people this is still very new. And so maybe if they heard about it from Bud Light, well, and if they turn out to be an ally, well, okay, we'll take it. But all the other negative aspects that's come with it, I think it's not worth it. There's a lot of like unlearning to do about how to represent our community. Also, just like just an example, like that police officer that used to be like the biggest weed grower buster, and now he owns a brand of weed and he sells it at SQDC. How fucked up is that? I'm sorry, I don't know if I can use that word, but yeah, I'm pretty heated about that too. When I see rainbow capitalism, it just, I don't know, when I see people that are like, oh, this is good, and I'm like, no, it's not. So yeah, I agree with everything that was said about that.
And they don't need to make money off of it. That's the thing. Like corporations were like posting banners in their store like, hey, celebrate Pride. And they weren't selling Pride products to like
exactly
take from us. That is appropriation at its finest. Like literally taking like a culture, like the culture of queerness, putting it on a shelf, selling it to reap benefits from it. It's horrible. Sorry, Kira, I know you unmuted yourself.
No, it's okay. Like I'm also trying to like, okay, which thing do I say first? Yeah, because like from like the start, like just like I don't know, like Esso having like Pride commercials. Anyway, like, and even just like organizations like changing their logo, like, you know, like businesses changing their logos to like the rainbow flag. Anyway, that also just really irks me. But yeah, I really think that like Alyssa, like what you just said about like people who have been on the front lines of criminalizing Black people, Indigenous people, queer people, poor people for cannabis possession, you know, and engagement in these like cannabis markets, now profiting off of them. I really have a hard time understanding like how you can sit with yourself and reconcile those two things, you know. So yeah, on like the cannabis side. And then just like at the basis of this whole thing is capitalism and motives that are based in making money off the backs of whoever. And then, you know, being quite clear about the fact that like you don't really care about queer people, about gender diverse people until they can make you money. And a lot of situations, I think that the commodification of pride is more insulting than helpful. Like I appreciate your point too, Alyssa. Like I think that that's what makes the conversation so complicated, is that like sometimes there can be good that comes out of pride initiatives like within organizations, but yeah, it's still like really globally as a whole really difficult to stomach. And I just think that like, you know, we've really gotten to a point of I think that in a certain respect, businesses and you know whatever different organizations that are pretty purely based off of making money have really embraced this new conception of like pride versus queer liberation, versus like what are the ways that that structures change to benefit queer people, to benefit trans people, non-binary people, because obviously like that would never be a conversation that would benefit them. Like I think that the commodification of pride, I think that capitalist motives are antithetical to the type of liberation that like queer and non-binary and trans people need. So like, yeah, I really appreciate that like this question was included. I think that we're all like pretty heated about it too. But yeah, I think that like I also have a feeling that the people who are making these decisions and who are so transparently performative might not actually realize the disrespect or the harm that these fake initiatives cause to actual queer and gender diverse people.
Yes, I think they're more aware than we like to think. I mean, they're mega corporations with hundreds of people thinking about their marketing plans and stuff. I think they, like, you gave Esso as an example, as if Esso cares about people, period. Like,
yeah.
So, yeah, that's all I have to say.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I wanted to like just to like jump in with the question kind of at the end. I think you said, and how do we resist? Like, do we resist, and how do we resist? Because like, okay, if we do resist, and we are getting corporations to take pride out of their stores, and no one like, and then pride like pops in and then disappears. Then what? Like, are we now taking that queer liberation again and like it being our thing? Or is it like also eliminating the space for people, like a kid that's at the store with their parent and they're like walking by and they're like, what's pride? You know, and then that kid just happens to want to, you know, is like also interested in, you know, like, or like not interested, but like their mind is like telling them that they're queer and they're looking for their community. You know, if that is eliminated from that perspective, then the capital, I don't know, like the people who are in those capital societies, I don't really consider myself, I like refuse to walk through Walmart's doors. Like I am one of those people who's like, I will literally like, I'd rather like search for years until I go in to find that one thing that's on the shelf, you know? But like, is that eliminating it? And also, should we resist that? I want to hear like your guys' perspectives on that, because like, I don't know, my brain is like turning now.
I think it's hard to resist because like if we like say we resist pride or we resist this one thing, then we're like unappreciative queers. We're, oh well, we did this thing for you, here you go, take it how we did it, because at least we did something. And if we reject it, they don't give us the option to just be like, hey, maybe tweak it, maybe change it, maybe do this for us, this is what we need. We don't want marches, maybe we want like job security, we want safety, we want all of these things. Maybe give us that. Maybe we don't need to walk in the street with a flag, but we need something tangible that can actually serve us other than like that 1 week a year or that 1 day a year or that 1 hour a year. Like I think it's like more important, and I'm not saying like don't do pride, because like pride is fantastic. And I mean, I've never even had the chance to do a pride, like a public pride. So I'd like for sure do that, but like there are so many more things that like can be done with this money. And like instead of marketing your beers with the rainbow flag, give to a queer charity, give to a homeless shelter, give to, because like you talk about like safety, even like homeless shelters, like queer folk are the people that are using homeless shelters at the highest rate, and we are the people who are the least safe in those shelters. And so give to places that are safe for us. Like there are places that will like refuse you completely because if you fill out the form, you say you're queer, you say you're trans, you say you're non-binary, and they will just be like, no thank you. And so you want to do change, you want to have an actual pride, then like be proud of us all year and not just for that 1 week.
Yeah, and you know, perhaps like I guess this goes back, I have no answers to like no like you know super insightful answers to the how do we resist part, mostly just other questions. Because I wonder, you know, like let's say with the legal cannabis markets and like different companies that exist currently, like do you try to then prioritize cannabis businesses that have, you know, proper gender affirming care included in their health insurance, or whatever, like different aspects of like people's actual material realities when working in these organizations, well, in these companies, that do benefit like the lives of the queer and gender diverse people who work there? Or do you just like reject the legal cannabis market entirely? Yeah, I don't know. I think it's a really good question. And I'm going to plug this, despite my brain also saying like, maybe you should not, but I'm like very obsessed with the WNBA, especially recently. And it's always this question that's on my mind of like, you know, if I like support, like if I like buy merch from the W, as a way to like support, you know, this organization that gets like so much less attention than the NBA. But I'm still, you know, it's still like a huge corporation. And like, it doesn't really benefit the players directly, but like, what does it take to get them that recognition? And like the WNBA is super queer. And also like has been a leader of like a lot of, racial justice and other like equity initiatives. So I don't know. There's like a useless more questions added to the questions that have already been posed. Maybe people listening have ideas. Sorry?
It is not useless. But it is a good question. I seriously don't know how to answer it. I think we should all work together, but I think we should also resist. We should not let ourselves, like, we can't let non-queer people decide for queer people. That's for sure. And that's really what's been happening since like what, 30 years? And especially in the last like 10, 15 years. It's mostly organized by corporations, and that's like old white cis dudes that doesn't care about anyone or anything but money. But like, we can't just, a part of me thinks that we can't just like, we're such a little group compared to the rest of the world that if we just exclude ourselves and we completely resist, there's gonna be like nothing for us. But also, like, yeah, we can't just let them, like, yeah, there needs to be like a conversation between the two parties, and like, I don't know how this is gonna happen, but it needs to happen.
Absolutely. Thank you all for sharing. Does anybody have something else to add? I don't know. Oh, yeah, go for it.
I just want to say, I know that we seem small, but we are not. You know, I don't think that the queer community is as small as we think it is. You know, because the other group probably thinks that they're small too, and the queer community is just constantly growing. Because I mean, think about it, the queer community isn't like, it's not just queer people. You know, it's a plethora of different like people that define themselves as queer as maybe a blanket term. But it's like what we were saying earlier. Like, you're walking down the street and you see another queer person, but like, did you get their number? Like, call them up, hit them up, have dinner with them. Like, you know, that's how we bind and restart the resisting thing. Like I mentioned it earlier, but just like as a quick drop, like my opinion of resisting is buying from our queer folk. You know, like going to queer events, having queer events. I had a friend who threw a queer opulence party. Like, so literally everybody came like decked out in gyms and everything. It was absolutely fabulous. But like, I met so many people at their house, you know, and I'm like, where are those things? That's how we resist, because now we're not going to like, you know, these like hetero bars to like hang out, but we're like supporting our friend at their place, and like everyone helped them clean, everyone helped them decorate, everyone helped them like get ready, and we all were like there, like ready for it. And then I think that's how we do the resisting.
That's a really great point. It reminds me of like just it was a tweet I saw, and I think it was a famous quote or something, but it might not have been. But it was just that the only alternative to despair is community. And I think that especially can ring true for the queer community and any attempts at resistance, right? Just solidarity, especially interpersonally. So we are gonna start taking questions from the audience. So just if you're in the audience, feel free to drop any questions. I mean, this one kind of goes off of what we were just talking about, actually. But I think the only question we have so far was, what are our opinions on Pride Month as a whole? Any thoughts?
Well, I like Pride Month. We didn't have a Pride last year, and I don't know. I'm just happy when it comes. It's, I don't know, but also, yeah, when I see all the rainbow capitalism, I'm like torn. I don't know what to think about it. But like, if it was just about us and not those companies, yeah, I really love Pride Month. Like, we need them.
Absolutely. Kira?
Yeah, I guess I feel like exactly the same way. Like Pride Month and even like the Pride Parade itself, like has had an important place in my life. Like I remember when I was in high school and the first time I went to a Pride Parade was very stressful, even though there's a million people there. Like I went with a friend who, I mean, at the time was straight. I don't know if she still is, but you know, was there like just to support. And like that was a super important moment for me, and you know, kind of going back to like how kids might be able to like see expressions of pride and expressions of sexual and gender diversity. Yeah, you know, I do see the importance in Pride as a month, Pride as a moment in time. Also, like use it as an excuse to like if somebody disagrees with me, being like, but it's Pride. Like, you're not allowed this month. Yeah, so I think like there's still there's still these important aspects, and I think that like it's also what you make out of it. You know, I had like a discussion with my queer cousin who was like, yeah, so like, what are you doing to celebrate Pride this month? Which is, like a pretty in-depth question, because there's been, several years of, okay, I'm going to use this month to learn more about our collective history. But once you've spent many years in a row doing that, like, what are you doing for, like, your community? How are you gathering? How are you supporting one another? I like these like moments in time where you're kind of prompted to reflect about these things and perhaps act on them.
Absolutely. Do we have any other thoughts? You can feel free to go for it. We also do have some questions afterwards as well, more specifically relating to cannabis. So feel free.
I just wanted to like throw in there, like, this is just Akira. Like, I completely agree with you. I do the same thing with the Pride. Like my friends are like, why are you late? I'm like, it's Pride, leave me alone. Or like my parents are like, oh, like, we need you to stop by. I'm like, Mom, it's Pride. No, I can't. I'm sorry, I'm busy. Like use Pride for everything. I just want to say you are not alone.
Great, thank you. Connor, do you have anything to add? Or
I mean, like I said, I haven't really experienced Pride as like a grand thing. I've done like small like workshops, and I've done like panel discussions, but I haven't like experienced, like, I feel like Pride, when I think of Pride, I think of like that Pride March. And until I like experienced that for the first time, I don't think that like I can have like that bigger opinion of the thing. But I do definitely like, I appreciate knowing that it's out there, because like for a long time when I was younger, I didn't think that was available, and I didn't think that that was something that I would ever be able to go to. And so that's definitely something I'm looking forward to experiencing, even though there is like those aspects of like capitalization.
absolutely. Thank you all so much for sharing. So we have a question. I'm just going to put it across the screen and also read it out from Sean. Love to hear more about panelists' thoughts on how cannabis is like free therapy. Would anybody like to start us off?
Yeah, sure. It's definitely like therapy to me. As in, like, don't come talk to me before my wake and bake. No, but like, seriously, it is really like a moment of relaxation, and like I really like feel it also, like it's a very like good muscular relaxant, and I use it for that. And yeah, definitely, like I'm never gonna smoke if I'm like a stressful moment or whatever. It's really like a moment to sit down, relax, and be with my thoughts, or like just share a moment of intimacy with someone, and like a good discussion. And yeah, it is really like free therapy.
I'll jump in and say as well, like, as far as it being like free therapy, I agree. I mean, was not, I wouldn't call it free therapy because you still have to buy cannabis, but I mean, unless someone's giving it to you, then yeah, then it's free therapy. But the way I see, the way I use cannabis often is not only in anxious situations, kind of like how Alyssa was just saying, like, you don't want to just necessarily smoke only when you're stressed. The reason why I say this is because our bodies store like all of the information that we feed to it. So if you're stressed and you're constantly feeding, you're like, I'm going to smoke because I'm stressed, then you're going to still be stressed even after the smoke. That's because you're storing that information. There's a book called The Body Keeps the Score. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of it. I highly advise you to read it and to like understand more about like muscle memory and about how your body like stores all of this information. When I think of therapy, I often think of yoga. So like for me, yoga has been my therapy for a very long time. I do think that everyone should have a therapist. I think therapists need therapists, but I think that yoga for me, being a queer nomad, has not always been easy to find a therapist. So having yoga as in my toolbox and having weed in my toolbox, I'm like, you know what? I don't want to talk to anybody. I'm going to go climb on this roof. I'm going to smoke a joint. I'm going to do yoga for like 2 hours, or like just practice on my mat. And that has genuinely helped me stay positive in my own, because that's like, I'll smoke and I'm just like, whoa, like whatever I was worried about is gone now. So, and I feel flexible, and I still have a whole day ahead of me, you know? So I highly encourage like using cannabis for mental clarity in a way as well too. There is a fogginess that comes along when you smoke, but in a way, if you sit down and you get a sheet of paper and you turn on some tunes and you're smoking, clear your mind, just write down every thought that comes out, and then eventually your mind's going to be like, you're going to be so blissed and there's no more stress because it's all on the paper, and then you can move the paper and live your happy high life, you know. That's how I see it.
I think it also returns to the fact that like the medical field isn't always safe for queer folk, and so like using cannabis in that way allows us to feel safe. Because like if you're going to a space where like you're going to talk about something that makes you stressed or anxious or all of these emotions, and you're stressed about just going to that place, then you're not going to feel refreshed after you leave that place. If you go into like smoking cannabis with like the intention of like practicing mindfulness, practicing like spirituality, having those aspects, and like you said, writing. Like I use writing to heal. Like writing is my free therapy, and it's quite free because like you can buy like a big note sheet for like $2. But it's something that if you go in with those intentions, then you can find that therapy within it. Whereas like those medical fields often don't come with that like security or like lack of stress.
Yeah, I think that also, I mean, I've said this in like other discussions, so I don't know, forgive me for repeating myself perhaps, but I also think that it can be really useful for us to think about like what is therapeutic use of cannabis. You know, like sometimes just like hanging out with your friends can be therapeutic, like, but that would kind of be more described as like social use, right? And so expanding our understandings of health, of mental health, I think can be really beneficial for us, like thinking about how queer and gender diverse people might use weed like therapeutically together, alone. And then also, there was a point in the middle that I wanted to make that I forgot, but I just also wanted to mention, like, on the topic of liberation, on the topic of solidarity, I've heard more about weed being cheaper than therapy, like, like for mental health and for mental wellness. But I also think that like it's important for us not to forget members of our communities who are chronically ill, who are disabled, and who might be benefiting from cannabis use for like physical difficulties as well. And I guess like this ties into the conversation around like yoga and like being connected to your body. And I don't know, I like would love to be a person who does yoga. So I'm maybe not and like expressing it in the most eloquent way. But I think that like connection of, when your body feels good and when you're able to find benefits in your mental health from it as well, I think is like another really important facet of cannabis. And just like also recognizing that in this country, medical cannabis legalization was pushed forward by patients, right? And that, I mean, kind of, it makes sense, right? Because the cannabis is used medically, but that really did lay the groundwork later for non-medical use as well. And remembering like those aspects of medical or therapeutic use, I think too.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for sharing. We do have a couple of different questions in the chat now. I don't think that we'll actually have time to get to all of them before 8:30, but I will put a different one up on the screen right now, and it might be our last question before we have to wrap up. This one in particular is about families and queerness. Maybe more some interpersonal factors. So has anyone reconnected with friends or family over cannabis who may have been alienated by your queerness? Anybody have any thoughts on that?
I personally don't talk too much of my family because of my transness. And I'm pretty much the not the only, but like the only people in my family that I still talk to. I'm the only weed user, so I think my experience is not really, like, I can't tell.
Does anybody else have
Yeah, I'll say, like, so I don't, for me, my parents and I have very differing views. I grew up like hardcore Christian. So like me being like super queer and super out about like my use of marijuana and like cannabis stuff, like my parents are like often like, oh, like, yeah, you're probably just gonna go smoke some weed. And I'm just like, yeah, actually I am. And I just make it very like blatant to them, but this is my experience, and I don't advise this for everybody to do with their parents, but I do this with mine because it caused my parents to actually, like, okay, generally the reason why people have any type of disdain against cannabis use or queerness is being not knowledgeable on it. Like they need to just look it up and read about it and learn about it. And that's what it caused for my parents, because I also voiced to like pretty much anybody who comes to me and they say cannabis is wrong, then I just say, do you want to be ignorant or do you want to learn about it? Because that's the only option for you. You can either choose to be ignorant or you can be knowledgeable about it. And choosing to be knowledgeable is far more beneficial to that person and you, in order to do that. The reason, like, for this answer specifically, I feel that it has brought me and my parents closer because, like, I don't think that I was forced out. Like when I came out as queer and when I came out in general, I wasn't like necessarily like forced, but the energy around the entire situation caused me to alienate myself. And I truly just like ripped myself away from it in order to like kind of just discover my own self, and then re-entering into my parents' lives and stuff, like slowly, and just being like, hey, here I am, and this is what I believe about cannabis, this is what I believe about queerness, has like really, I've seen it open their eyes a bit because they want to learn. And I'm like, I don't want you to be ignorant. I want you to know how cannabis can be great for glaucoma or great for stress or great for, there's like so many different benefits from it because it's an herb more than it is, in my opinion, it's more of an herb than it is a drug. But we're not like, pushing away like lavender and stuff, you know what I mean? So, yeah, but that's just there.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. Kira or Connor, do you have anything to add?
Oh, I think Connor's frozen. Is it just me?
No, he does look frozen to me. Maybe you can jump in quickly just because we want to get to that last question really quick before we actually end the broadcast.
Oh, for sure. Oh, okay. Maybe Connor had to go. But I mean, I don't have like my own experience. Wouldn't really like connect with like the difficulties that seem to be embodied in this question. Just like, I guess, a kind of global thought around the parallels in general that we can get from like sex ed that is encompassing of well, like, first of all, like not just like abstinence-based sex ed, but also that is encompassing of gender and sexual diversity, and how like that type of mindset when it comes to education can also be applied to drugs and to drug use. That like those, I think that those things are really close in how we approach them societally in school, and hopefully this kind of bigger efforts towards those types of structural changes might make these conversations easier. But yeah, from my personal standpoint, I wouldn't really have anything like of substance to add.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for sharing nonetheless. Do we have time for just a quick final question or all right, perfect. I think it's a pretty good general question just to end on. So do you have any thoughts about using cannabis as a way to explore your gender/sexual identity? Anybody want to start?
I think it can be a good way. I haven't done it really, because I started using cannabis way before expressing my queerness. But I think, yes, it can be a good way to explore your gender and sexual identity. Definitely.
Thank you for sharing. Kira or Ruben, any thoughts?
Yeah, I had kind of like touched on this earlier. Maybe more, I've heard it more in the context of psychedelics than cannabis. Although, like, I've definitely also heard it in the context of cannabis. In like the research literature, I kind of just remember that I'm supposed to be here more on like the research side than like my personal experience side. But you know, they are intertwined. But I took note of it. There's like this recent paper that talks about cannabis as a technology of the self, which is like a whole. I just think like that. Hearing that is somewhat self-explanatory, although like it seems pretty complex. But just like this idea of like having a tool to enhance certain aspects of your experience and to explore others, I definitely heard that as well. And again, that like I would just encourage us to tie that back to like, you know, if somebody is using cannabis to explore their gender and sexual identity, can that be like considered therapeutic? Like, is that what we put into the box of like self-medication? Again, just more questions. I don't know, Ruben, if you had anything to add.
I was gonna just say, yeah, I really do think that cannabis can help. But I mean, since I am here, from my experience, I'll say that I like understanding my gender and like my sexual identity was kind of hard for a while, because I was just always like, well, I present very masculine a lot. And then my friends were always like, no, you don't. But like, and I was like, oh, I didn't know. I didn't know that I always had like a little bit. And that's kind of how I like understood the queerness. But I know, for instance, the like how I tie cannabis into that is like, if I'm getting ready to go out, if I'm getting ready to go like out to eat for dinner or something, and I want to throw on makeup and I want to throw on like fancy like clothes or something, I always smoke weed before, and then it helps me like when I'm getting ready, because I'm like, maybe I'll play a little bit differently with my makeup today, and then it makes me also, it removes that for me, it removes that anxiety of going out like feeling like myself, like wearing things that I wouldn't just wear on a normal day because somebody might say something to me, you know, or like, because even if you're queer and you're out, you still question certain things right before you wear them out. You know, there's always like that, like, are people going to say something to me if I wear this? And then we come into that mindset of like, I don't care. And then you keep going. Me, I just like light my spliff and I'm like, I don't care. I'm going to do it anyway. So I definitely think that it's a great way to explore gender and sexual identities.
Absolutely. Thank you all for sharing that. Those were all very insightful answers. And with that, we will close our actual discussion section. I'm just going to put up on the screen a quick link to our review survey for everybody in the audience. We'd really appreciate it if you took the time to just quickly fill this out. I'd also just like to briefly thank Cannabis and Psychosis and the Schizophrenia Society of Canada, as well as the GRIP, for allowing us to put this event on. It was really an excellent conversation, and it was so great to hear from each and every one of our panelists, even if Connor did have to go just a little bit early. We really, really appreciated it. And thank you all so much for your time. Any closing remarks or anything like that, or?
I'm just happy that I was here, and I think y'all were very lovely, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Same. I just want to say thank you guys for like piggying back with me and having this this little key session about cannabis and queerness. It makes me so happy, and I feel honored to have been able to speak with all of you and hear your perspectives.
Obviously, same. And thank you to everyone who bared with us through our little like technical difficulties at the beginning. Thanks for your questions, for your comments, and obviously to everyone who's a part of the discussion.
All right. And with that, I will end the live stream. Thank you all so much for being here. Check out Cannabis and Psychosis, as well as Get Sensible and VoxCan, all on Facebook and all of that. Thank you, and have a wonderful Tuesday evening.